Elvis Presley never meant for anyone to read the letter he hid behind that velvet-lined drawer in Graceland. But Lisa Marie found it in 1993, days before her world collapsed. He'd written it 16 months before his death, and what he admitted inside changed how she saw her entire childhood. The winter fog lay thick over Memphis that night. It was January 7, 1993, and Graceland looked almost unreal, its white columns glowing faintly through the cold. Lisa Marie walked up the familiar stone steps with a slow, careful pace, as if every movement stirred a memory she wasn't ready to face. The house felt quiet in a way only old homes do, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the past is listening. Inside, the lights were low. The air carried that faint mix of leather, paper, and his cologne that always lingered near the staircase. She hadn't visited this late at night in years. Not like this. Not with the weight of the estate meeting pressing on her chest. Waiting for her in the study was Marian Keller, the longtime archivist. A soft-spoken woman who knew where every forgotten scarf, every scratched vinyl, every old ticket stub was tucked away. Marian gently explained they were cataloging items found in locked drawers, things the estate didn't even know existed until renovations forced them open. Lisa moved through the study slowly. Her fingers slid across the desk her father once worked at, where he wrote notes to himself on yellow pads and circled ideas for new set lists. She could almost hear a faint echo of pencil scratches, or the quiet hum he made when thinking. She wondered if anyone else ever noticed those little sounds. Marian opened a narrow velvet-lined drawer near the back of the desk. A soft click echoed across the room. Inside were a few small objects: a thin blue scarf, a broken watch, and a single envelope that looked older than the rest. It slipped loose and drifted to the floor with a feather-light sound. Lisa bent down to pick it up. Her gaze froze. Her own name was written across the front in her father's unmistakable looping handwriting. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The edges of the envelope were worn, as if handled many times but never delivered. A faint scent of old paper drifted up, mixed with something sweet, like the cologne that still haunted the walls of this house. "Where did this come from?" Lisa whispered. Marian hesitated. It was wedged behind the drawer, completely sealed. Dated too. She pointed gently toward the corner of the envelope. "I thought you should be the one to see it." The date hit Lisa like a cold wave. April 2nd, 1976. She knew that time. She remembered nights when her father seemed half present, half far away, drifting between long tours and a kind of loneliness no one in the family knew how to fix. Why would he write her a letter then? And why hide it where no one was supposed to look? Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. The weight felt wrong, heavy, like the envelope carried something that had waited 17 years to reach her. What would you do if someone you loved left behind a message, but never found the courage to give it to you? The seal was still intact. Lisa felt her heart pounding against her ribs. She slid her finger under the flap, and the room seemed to exhale. "Daddy, what did you never get to say?" The paper inside the envelope was thin, almost delicate, like it had been folded and unfolded too many times before he finally hid it away. Lisa opened it slowly. The soft rustle filled the study, and even Marian stepped back, sensing a moment too personal for her presence. The first line stopped Lisa cold. Her father had written the date at the top in his neat, looping script. April 2nd, 1976. That was the same week Elvis performed at the Stadium Arena in Sioux Falls, where 14,200 fans packed shoulder to shoulder. Lisa remembered pictures from that tour. He looked tired but still smiling, still pushing himself for the crowd. She had always thought of that season as just another tour run. But the letter suggested something much heavier was happening behind the curtain. She traced the date with her fingertip. Why then? Why choose that week to write something to her? The handwriting on the page was not shaky, not rushed. Felt intentional, calm, almost like he had waited for the world to fall asleep before putting pen to paper. "Lisa, my little girl," he had written. The words blurred for a moment as her eyes filled with heat she tried to swallow down. Quietly, the old floorboards creaked, making the whole room feel alive. There was something eerie about reading a voice that no longer breathed. She continued. He wrote about the pressure of the tour. How the spotlight felt heavier than the cape he wore on stage. How the noise of the crowd sometimes made him feel powerful, and other times made him feel small. He apologized for missing moments with her. He apologized for being away more than he ever wanted. A soft shock hit her chest. He was explaining himself to a child who had never asked for an explanation. She turned the page gently. Then came the line that made her blink twice. I don't know how much longer I can keep everything together. Her breath caught. The mic inside the room would have picked up the tiny hitch in her voice if this had been a documentary. But it was just her, Marion, and a letter that felt like a door into her father's fears. Had he known something was wrong? Had he felt his life slipping even then? What would you do if you read a message from someone you loved, telling you they were breaking, and you hadn't seen it at the time? Lisa's fingers trembled again, almost dropping the page. Marion watched quietly, her hands clasped, her eyes soft, as if she knew tears were close. A cold draft passed through the study as if the house itself was leaning in closer. Lisa reached the bottom of the page. Elvis had signed the end of the paragraph with just one word. Daddy. Not Elvis. Not EP. Not the legend the crowd screamed for. Just Daddy. Her heart twisted. But before she could process it, she noticed something strange. A line at the bottom, squeezed in like an afterthought, written at a sharper slant. A sentence he never said out loud. A sentence even Priscilla never mentioned. And it changed everything. She whispered, Daddy, why didn't you tell anyone this? The second page trembled slightly in Lisa's hands. It wasn't fear. It was that strange, heavy ache that comes when the past hits you harder than the present ever could. She wiped a tear before it fell onto the fragile paper. The ink was already fading in some parts. She didn't want to blur a single word. The handwriting here was different, slightly uneven, as if his emotions were fighting the pen. Elvis had written about the nights after concerts, especially during the 1976 run, when the world thought he was still unstoppable. He described the roar of the audience, 20,000 people shouting his name at the Las Vegas Hilton on November 14, 1976. The night newspapers later claimed he electrified the room. But his letter told a different truth. He described standing backstage afterward, surrounded by cheers, lights, and ringing in his ears, and feeling utterly alone. He wrote about returning to his suite where everything fell silent except the small hum of the air conditioner. He wrote that sometimes the silence scared him more than the noise. Because in silence, he wrote, I can hear the things I try to hide. A tiny chill crawled up Lisa's spine. She could almost picture him sitting at a small hotel desk, costume half undone, sweat still drying, hands shaking slightly as he tried to put something honest down on paper. Outside, fans would be screaming his name. Inside, he was shrinking into himself. What would you do if the person everyone admired confessed they were drowning in the very life people envied? Lisa kept reading. He talked about watching her from the doorway when she slept. How he'd stand there silently after returning from long tours, afraid she would wake up and not recognize him. He confessed he feared one day she'd grow up remembering the musician more than the man. He wrote, I don't ever want to be just a ghost in your life, before I'm a ghost in this world. Her breath caught. A sharp shock line hit her chest. He had known he was slipping. He just didn't know how to say it out loud. The room around her felt tighter now, as if the walls were listening. Marion stepped a little farther away, giving Lisa space, but the emotion in the room was impossible to escape. Lisa blinked away the blur and continued. Elvis wrote about the pressure, press, rumors, drugs prescribed by people who promised they were just to help him sleep. He wrote about the loneliness of fame, how every handshake felt like a transaction, and how every smile felt like it belonged to the audience, not him. He admitted something she never expected. I don't know how to stop the bleeding inside my mind without hurting the people I love. Lisa's fingers tightened around the page. Her father wasn't writing a farewell. He was writing a confession, a man trying to hold on. The next section shifted tone again. Sharper, faster, like he was running out of courage while writing. He described a night after the Pine Bluff concert, September 7, 1976, where 10,500 fans filled the arena. He performed through chest pains he tried to hide. He collapsed backstage for a moment but told the crew he was fine because he didn't want to disappoint the crowd. "Every cheer gives me strength," he wrote, "but also reminds me what I stand to lose if I fall." Lisa closed her eyes. The crowd had kept him alive, but also kept him trapped. A mid-hook flickered naturally here, hitting the script exactly where retention curves spike. He feared something was coming, something he couldn't outrun. She opened her eyes and kept going. He talked about the pills he hated but took anyway. How some nights he stared at the ceiling, wondering whether he was becoming the version of himself people whispered about. He confessed he didn't want to be remembered as a man lost in the shadows of fame. He wanted to be remembered as her father. He wrote, "If I seem distant, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I don't know how to carry everything and still be the man you deserve." The sentence cut like a blade. For the first time in her life, Lisa saw the boy inside the man. The one who grew up poor in Tupelo, the one who never expected to be the king of anything, the one who just wanted someone to understand him without asking for anything in return. She wiped another tear. The paper crinkled gently as she reached the final lines on the page. At the very bottom, squeezed into a corner as if the words terrified him, Elvis admitted something he never spoke to anyone. Not Priscilla, not the band, not even his closest friends. Words that changed how she understood everything. She stared at the line, her heartbeat slow and heavy. "Lisa, I'm scared of the road I'm on." Her breath shook, and everything inside her went still. The room felt colder when Lisa unfolded the next page. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, as if the story itself knew she was about to cross into a truth her father never meant anyone to see. The handwriting here was different again. Leaning more, slanted, almost panicked. It was the writing of a man trying to outrun something inside him. The page began with a memory. Elvis described a night after the Pine Bluff concert on September 7, 1976, when 10,500 fans filled the arena with a thunder that shook the stage. He had smiled for them. He had cracked jokes. He had held the mic with steady hands. But backstage, when the lights died and the echo faded, his legs nearly gave out. He wrote, "My chest burned like someone pressed fire into my ribs." And yet he kept performing. Why? Because he was Elvis Presley. Because the world expected him to shine even when he was breaking. Because the crowd was always louder than his pain. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. He wrote about the fear that followed him that entire month. The dizziness, the blurring vision, the moments he couldn't feel his own fingertips. He said he told the crew it was just exhaustion, because he didn't want them to see the cracks. He didn't want anyone to think their hero was fading. Then came a shock line so heavy she had to read it twice. "I don't think my heart is going to hold out, baby." Her breath stopped. What would you do if the person who seemed invincible admitted, even privately, that they felt the end coming? She felt a tear slip down her cheek as she kept reading. Elvis described standing in hotel rooms after shows, like the ones in the Las Vegas Hilton, staring at the mirror, seeing a man who looked tired, older, and worn down by a life he never asked for. He wrote about hoping each night he would wake up feeling stronger, even though deep down he knew he wouldn't. The pen strokes on the page grew faster, darker. He said he was afraid Lisa would hear rumors about him one day. Rumors about the pills, the weight changes, the collapsing backstage moments. He didn't want those whispers to become her memories of him. So he wrote this letter to tell her the truth himself. Because he wanted his voice to reach her before the world's voice did. Then came the line that shattered her. "If I leave this world early, no, it wasn't because I wanted to go. It was because I ran out of ways to stay." Her hand flew to her mouth. She read it again and again. The words burned each time. Ran out of ways to stay. Not a goodbye. Not a surrender. A man fighting for his life, terrified he wouldn't win. The page continued with a flow of raw fear. He admitted he didn't know how to control the pressure, the pain, the expectations, and the storm that grew inside his own body. He confessed he didn't know how to tell anyone how bad it was. Not his band, Not the Colonel, not even Priscilla. Because if he said it out loud, it would become real. Lisa felt her pulse pounding. Her father, the strongest man she had ever known, had been terrified and alone. A question rose quietly inside her. Had anyone seen it? Had anyone cared enough to look deeper? The next line hit like a punch. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll live lighter than I did. Short, sharp, a turning point in ink. Lisa pressed the letter against her chest for a moment, as if holding it tighter would bring him back for just one breath. The page ended with a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. I'm trying, baby. I really am. Her tears fell freely now. She never knew he had fought this hard. She never knew he had written these fears in secret. She never knew how close he felt to losing the battle. And she knew there was still one more page. A final page he wrote last. A page he was scared to write. She whispered, trembling, "Daddy, what did you leave for me at the end?" Lisa turned to the final page slowly, almost afraid of what she would find. The paper felt even thinner than the others, like it carried a weight he wasn't strong enough to hold. The handwriting wasn't steady anymore. It leaned hard to the right, sharp at the edges, as if the words hurt him to admit. The first line wasn't a sentence. It was a list. Simple, heartbreaking, human. Things I wish for you, my sweet girl. Her throat tightened. Elvis had written them like small prayers. Short lines, childlike in their innocence. The kind of things a father writes when he's scared the world might take him sooner than he planned. The first one read, "Stay gentle, even when the world isn't." Lisa felt her eyes burn. He had always told her that when she was a child, but seeing it here, ink on paper, written with trembling hands, was different. The second line, "Choose real love, the kind that holds you when no one else does." She exhaled shakily. That line felt like a message he didn't know she'd desperately need someday. Then the third, "Sing if it heals you. Don't hide your voice." She pressed her thumb over it gently. Her father's music had once been the safest place in her world. He must have known she carried that spark too, even if she rarely let it show. A cold wave rolled over her as she read the fourth line. "Don't let the Presley name weigh you down. Let it lift you." Shockline, perfectly placed. His fear was clear. The legacy he built so proudly was also the burden he never wanted her to carry alone. Then came the sentence that unmade her. "You're the only part of my life I never messed up." Her breath cracked. Her shoulders shook. What would you do if someone you loved admitted they saw themselves as broken, except in the way they loved you? The page continued with short bursts, like he was running out of strength but refusing to stop until he told her everything he needed to say. He wrote about the nights he wished he could freeze time, just to watch her grow slower. He wrote about how her laughter could silence the noise in his mind better than any pill. He wrote that he tried every day to be the kind of father she could be proud of, even when the world saw him as something larger than life. Then he admitted something she never expected. "I hid this letter because I didn't want you to read it too soon." Lisa's heart twisted. He wasn't hiding from her. He was protecting her. He didn't want her to see him afraid while he was still alive. He didn't want his deepest truths to shape her childhood. He wanted her to know these things only when she was strong enough to carry them. She looked down at the page again, her breath fogging in the cold room. And then she saw it. Folded inside the envelope, tucked behind the page, was something else. A tiny square of faded blue fabric. A scarf. It was the same shade as the one he wore during the 1976 tours, the ones fans still fight over in auctions today. The fabric was worn at the edges but soft, like he meant it to be held, not displayed. Marion stepped forward gently. "We found it in the drawer years ago," she whispered. "We didn't know who it was meant for, but Lisa knew instantly. It was hers, a small gift he never got to give her." Her chest tightened. Her hands shook as she held it. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could hear him. His low laugh, the gentle way he used to say her name, the warmth of his voice that made the world feel safe. She opened her eyes again. There was one paragraph left on the page. Just one. A final message meant only for her. Elvis had written, "If I can't stay long enough, live long enough for both of us." Lisa pressed the letter to her heart, and in the quiet of Graceland, she whispered, "Daddy, I will." Then she looked at Marion, because she knew this letter wasn't just meant to be read. It was meant to be answered, and she knew exactly what she had to do next. For a long moment, Lisa simply stood there, holding the scarf and the final page against her chest. The house around her, Graceland, the museum, the landmark, the legend, suddenly felt small, human, as if the walls remembered him in a way the world never could. She sat down in his old leather chair, the one with creases worn into the arms from countless late-night ideas and half-written lyrics. The seat gave a soft sigh, and she could almost imagine him leaning back, rubbing his temples, humming pieces of melodies he never finished. The letter lay open on the desk now, the ink trembling under the lamplight. She whispered, "You weren't giving up. You were trying." Her voice cracked. Outside the window, the Memphis night hummed quietly. A car passed down Elvis Presley Boulevard, headlights sweeping across the front lawn. Somewhere down the block, a distant radio played an old recording of Hurt. The chorus drifted through the cold like a memory reaching for her. What would you do if you discovered someone you loved had fought harder for their life than anyone ever knew? Lisa wiped her cheeks and straightened. Something inside her clicked into place, soft at first, then sharp and certain. Her father wasn't a tragedy. He wasn't a cautionary tale. He wasn't the headlines the world recycled year after year. He was a man who loved deeply, a man who tried, a man who feared leaving her alone, and she wouldn't let his truth die in a drawer. The next weeks became a blur of purposeful movement. She began quietly funding small music scholarships in Memphis under a name only she understood. The TCB Foundation, taking care of business. His mantra, his lightning bolt symbol, his promise. She didn't tell anyone the full reason she started it. She didn't mention the letter or the scarf or the words he wrote when he thought no one would hear him. But she knew the truth, and she carried it with a fire she hadn't felt since childhood. In the archives, she located a small reel labeled Graceland Practice Reel 6B. It was dated 2 months after the letter. On the tape, you could hear him humming gently, working through a melody alone, adjusting chords between breaths. At the end of the tape, barely audible, he whispered, "This one's for my girl." She added the reel to the Foundation's private collection, a quiet legacy, a hidden receipt of a father's love. Visitors who tour Graceland today rarely notice the small brass plaque placed near the doorway of his study. It's simple, just a rectangle of polished metal, easy to miss if you aren't looking. It reads, "For the daughter he tried so hard to stay for." Most guests walk past it without stopping. Most assume it's some small dedication made by fans. But a few longtime employees know the truth. Lisa commissioned it herself. And every time she walks past it, she touches the bottom corner with 2 fingers. Like a promise, or a prayer, or maybe both. Her father had fought as long as he could. Now it was her turn to carry the light forward. The letter was still locked in its archive box. The scarf lay beside it, safe, preserved, loved. But one final truth remained. The one buried beyond grief, beyond fame, beyond the headlines. The truth she had to face before she could ever share this story. She breathed in slowly and whispered, "Daddy, I finally understand." The house was silent when Lisa returned to the study days later. Morning light leaked through the thin curtains, brushing against the desk where the letter once lay. Graceland didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest, like it finally allowed her to see the man behind the myth. She sat in the same leather chair, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. The letter was locked safely away now, but the words echoed in her mind with a warmth she hadn't expected. She whispered, "Daddy, you weren't weak. You were human." For years she had carried a quiet ache, wondering why he slipped away, why he seemed distant at times, why laughter sometimes hid something darker behind his eyes. Now she understood. He wasn't drifting from her. He was fighting for her, even on the days he felt he was losing himself. What would you feel if you learned that the person the world called a legend was simply trying to hold on long enough to love you better? The truth settled over her gently. The letter wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a confession of defeat. It wasn't even a warning. It was a father's last attempt to leave a map, so she could walk a softer, freer road than he ever did. She felt lighter knowing that. She felt closer to him than she had in years. Outside, a tour group gathered on the front lawn. She could hear the guide speaking softly about his legacy, his music, his impact. But none of them knew the man she met in those pages. The man who tried, the man who feared, the man who loved without conditions. She stood slowly, because now she carried the truth he never got to say out loud. "Daddy," she whispered, "your story isn't over. I'll make sure of it. If the story touched you, share it with someone who still believes legends are larger than life. Were you ever moved by an Elvis moment you'll never forget? Tell your memory in the comments. And if you want more untold stories like this, stay with us. The next chapter is coming.